Welcome, everybody, to HR Tech Talks. I'm your host today, George Rogers. And today I'm going to be joined by Keith, who is the owner of Smartrank. Smartrank is an awesome platform for talent acquisitions, and I'm excited about the conversation we're going to be having to hear his insights and thoughts that he's going to be bringing us today. And I know that it'd be beneficial to you as well. And so I want to challenge you and encourage you to join in with us today, comment, share this feed if you can and you're willing to. We'll love to hear from you and your thoughts and maybe questions that you may have for Keith during this conversation. Without further ado, I want to bring Keith on and joining us today. Keith, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, George.
Awesome. Well, as always, I like to start and make sure our audience know who you are and a little bit about Smartrank. So I know we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the conversation, but can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So again, Keith Hulen, I co-founded Smartrank just about 3 years ago, and I've been a hiring manager for over 20 years, which is kind of what got me started to want to really investigate and understand more about talent acquisition. And we'll dive into some of that because obviously I dealt with a few challenges there as a hiring manager. And so essentially, Smartrank, at a high level, completely automates the applicant screening process by, with a really specific set of questions and answers that are exactly what the hiring manager is looking for. So it's really like pulling in the hiring manager. And then we're able to stack rank and filter those job applicants automatically without any type of need to review a resume or anything like that. So we do all of that without needing or using a resume in any way. Which is kind of one of the huge things that makes us unique. And by doing that, we're able to have some pretty incredible benefits that clients can do. When you remove the resume and a few of those pieces, it completely opens up talent acquisition, and it ends up solving a lot of those key problems that they have.
That's awesome. I know getting to know you on the background and meet you last week and discussing a lot more as well. You don't come from a traditional talent acquisition background like a recruiter. So as an outsider that's now been heavily entrenched in TA for the past 3 years, what are a couple of observations you have around talent acquisition and or technology in general?
Yeah, so that's right. I'm not a recruiter and I haven't been a talent acquisition leader, but I have been a hiring manager. So I've been involved in working with talent acquisition teams internally or external type of recruiters my entire career. And that's really, again, what got me started to want to try to investigate this more. And, sometimes your best investigations come from outsiders, right? Because they see these problems from a totally different view. So I almost like to consider myself like an investigative reporter / consultant that comes in this with a really objective view and just looks at all of the scenarios and then tries to kind of come up with some solutions. When we started this process 3 years ago, we didn't come in with any preconceived notions. We just came in and said, let's just start setting up meetings. So we scheduled hundreds of meetings and we just started asking talent acquisition leaders and recruiters, what are your problems? And we started to hear some consistencies and some themes. And then we started to break it down to the root cause, because that's really what you need to do if you want to solve a problem. And so, what are some of the observations? Like, I guess high level, I mean, there's a lot, but like if I kept it high level, I would say one that really jumps out at me is talent acquisition is still very much using the same exact tools that they were 25 years ago. And in some respects, 540 years ago. So here's a little factoid for all of the listeners, and maybe for you, George. I like to throw this one out because it's just kind of cool and interesting that the resume is first attributed to being used by Leonardo da Vinci, literally 540 years ago. And so it's kind of crazy to think about, like, we still use this document today. But when you think about resumes, job descriptions, and traditional applicant tracking systems, that process and the review and the screening, that hasn't changed almost at all in the last 20 to 25 years. So that's a big one. Another one that I've noticed that I guess is a little unfortunate is just I've been on a lot of calls, a lot of meetings, and I hear a lot of problems that talent acquisition has, either directly from the recruiters, from the leaders, from the hiring managers, whatever it may be. I hear a lot of discussions around these problems, but I don't see tremendous amount of like, let's step out there and really like make some change here and solve these problems. So that, for good or for bad, it's just it's something that I've definitely had. I've noticed. It's an observation. And I guess the third one is that's a little bit interesting to me is to kind of be looking at this through talent acquisition lens. The way that they are kind of perceived within the organization is quite different, I think, than it is with, maybe some of the other departments within a company, and in some ways, and I don't mean this in any type of a derogatory way, but in some ways it's like more of a submissive role within the company, which is not how it should be, just for the record. But that if we're just kind of calling it what it is, that's unfortunately what it ends up being. Like all departments are equal to the organization becoming, successful. And even more so, I'll take it a step further. Talent acquisition is responsible for, finding and bringing in what are ultimately going to be the most expensive and the most important assets in the entire company, the people, right?
Yeah.
And yet they just aren't able to like assume the same role that sales or finance or software development or some of these other departments are. As one VP of talent acquisition told me a long time ago, crap rolls downhill, and for some reason talent acquisition always seems to be at the bottom of that hill. Like if turnover's high, blame talent acquisition. We're not finding people fast enough, blame talent acquisition. We're not finding the right quality, blame talent acquisition. So I think that's something that I noticed, and I think it needs to change, frankly.
Yeah. What do you propose? And when we talk about change, I always think about change. And when it comes to change, everybody wants change, right? When there's problems with retention or problems with, hiring process and hiring quickly and efficiently by hiring the right people. I always say everybody wants change, but nobody wants to be changed. So like change whatever it is, but as long as it doesn't mess up my department, right? What do you propose talent acquisition leaders do about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things. I mean, at a high level, so we'll keep this high level for right now, and we can dig into details maybe in a little bit. But like at a high level, talent acquisition has to elevate itself within the organization. They need to be on the same, par with sales and marketing and finance and software development and all these different areas. And I think, you look at a situation like what's happening right now. I'll give you a great example. You see talent acquisition teams getting laid off left and right. That's the first team a lot of times to go, right? To get laid off. And so you see this happening. And guess what's going to happen in 9 months to a year? As we pull out, as the economy pulls out and gets back to normal, they're going to be hiring recruiters like crazy, and then all of a sudden it's going to be like, you need to, let's go, let's hire. But think about that, right? Like that means that they look at recruiters and talent acquisition as dispensable assets. They're not, and they don't. And a lot of executive leadership doesn't understand that you don't just plug in and play recruiters, right? You can't do that actually. Like if you're an applicant that applies and you're talking to a recruiter and like, what's the culture like? I'm like, I don't know. I've only been here 10 days. And like, oh, well, what do you guys do? And they're like, I don't know. I'll get you on the phone with somebody that does know. Like these are big problems that, you can't have with talent acquisition, but the organization doesn't perceive them that way. So I think that, they have to kind of take some bolder decisions, sometimes. Like, if they say these are problems that need to get solved, and here's, let's say, new technology, we're on HR Tech Talks here. Here's new technology. It's not okay to get shut down, right? Like if they walk into the head of HR or wherever they have to get the approval and say, I really want to get this new technology. It's going to help us to fundamentally change these things. And then they get told no, they got to fight that back, right? And they got to say, no, if you want X, I need to have Y. If you want faster, more best qualified people, then I need Y, which might be whatever the technology is to be able to kind of do that. And then I guess the last piece would just be, listening to the stakeholders, because it's pretty clear. All you got to do is a quick Google search, and you're going to see applicants are not happy with the application and the hiring process. Hiring managers are not happy with it across the board. Even recruiters are extremely frustrated with the way that it goes. So, when you look at that, you got to kind of do something different. Like, and in order to do something different, I'll just say it this way, like, you do have to take a little bit of risk, not enormous risk, but you have to take risk to get experience. And then through that experience, you have learning, right? And
Yeah.
other departments do this all the time. Like, they'll take risks and get this new technology that could have a great return. Okay, if it doesn't work out, then they go with something else. Like, most people aren't just automatically fired over these decisions. I think that's a misconception, but like, they need to do something about it. There's a quote that I'll end this thought with, which I absolutely love, and it's by Einstein, and he says, you can't solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it. So if you're attacking this with the same exact viewpoint that you've had for the last 20 years, it's not going to work. You're not going to really fundamentally solve these problems.
Yeah. There's obviously problems on all levels, and a lot of inconsistencies as well. What are some of those biggest? What are the most biggest, or maybe the most consistent problems you have heard of from clients that are using SmartRank, or maybe clients that you don't have but you noticed as you're in your discovery around talent acquisition?
Well, I think there's a few areas. I mean, there's a lot, actually. I'll try to summarize just a few that I've seen, but one being productivity and morale. So, of recruiters is what I'm talking about. So, you think about how a recruiter goes about their day to day. They open up their ATS and they have 100 applicants. They look through their requisition. They open up their requisition. They have 100 applicants in there, and they're literally going through those one by one by one by one by one, and they're comparing keywords between a resume and a job description. That is literally the most inefficient way to go through applicants, is to just go through them one at a time. I can't think of a more inefficient way, but that's how virtually every talent acquisition team is doing it, right? Because that's what we've been doing. That's what I was taught from the manager before me, and that's what's continuing. So I think there's a big productivity issue there. And then there's a morale issue for sure. And I know this is for a fact over the last 3 years. So I just read this the other day. This was a article I read. 65% of recruiters have an average tenure of 2 years or less. And just think about that for a second. 2 years or less, 2/3 of recruiters have an average tenure of 2 years or less.
Yeah.
That's not very much time. Like, you can barely even start to get involved in the culture and understanding the organization and what they do. And then you're out the door and you're on to the next company. Now, there's something driving that, right? There has to be, right? And I think because you're seeing it across the board, it's things like what we just said, like reviewing and screening applicants. Like, that is, in all the studies, the number one most time-intensive process that they have.
Yeah.
But what are people doing to kind of fix it? So, in one of those other studies, it was like 1 in 2 recruiters will leave for better technology. They'll leave their company for better technology that makes their lives easier. So that makes sense. I think hiring manager engagement is a huge one. Hiring manager engagement is on the top 5 list of what talent acquisition leaders want to work on every year. Why is it on the list every year? Why is it on that same list? I can tell you, because nothing is changing in the process. Like, hiring managers don't want to go through these job descriptions and update them. They don't get any value out of that. They don't want to review your resumes that you're going to send them. I'm sorry, but like, they don't. And there's a lot of back and forth, like, issues with just communication. Like, you're always asking me for feedback on these people, but all you're giving me is a resume. So, like, give me more information. And the ultimate problem with all of this, right, is that, that relationship between the recruiter and the hiring manager is that, and we'll just call it what it is. Like, recruiters are not subject matter experts for every role they're hiring for, and they shouldn't be expected to be, right? But that is kind of the expectation, unfortunately, and they don't end up knowing exactly what the hiring manager is looking for. And there's the crux of almost all your problems you have. That's why you use the tools you use. That's why you have the process you have. That's why there's the frustration. That's why morale is down. That's why turnover is high. These are all reasons that stem from this root cause of this basic needing to know what that understanding of the role is that is never really defined. Like if you look at a job description, you're like, proficiency in Excel, what does that mean? That's a subjective term. Nobody's defined it, so it's a spectrum. And it's the same thing with anything else. Familiarity with, knowledge of, all of those are subjective. DE&I, where do I even start with that one, George? Like, there's a lot of talk. I'll just say this: there's a lot of talk about DE&I. I was on a call yesterday with a team of talent acquisition professionals. And that was my comment that when I first got to say something, I said, there's a lot of talk. We need to stop talking and start doing something about this. I'll sit on webinars from DE&I experts, and they will talk about this problem of unconscious bias. We get it. We know it. Yes, we all agree that this is a problem. Now, what are we doing about it? Like, as an example, I'll just give, kind of one quick thing. Resumes and names are the two biggest sources of unconscious bias. If you want to fundamentally change the way that this is going to work, stop using those things. Stop looking at those things and letting that bias be in there. You can train and do awareness. I think that's good. I'm not saying that's not. But you have to remove the bias if you really want to, take it to the next level. George, there's all, these, statistics. They've run these time and time again, these studies. And they just ran one another couple of years ago where they take a resume and they have typical white names and they send it out, and then they get return on those. Then they take the exact same resumes, right? And they have, let's say more African-American names, and they get a lower response rate. That is fundamentally wrong, right? That is not the way it should work, but it is the way that it works because, there's bias that is just there. This is not going to go away unless you remove the mechanism for having that bias. So D&I is a whole big one. I saw a stat the other day that 80% of HR professionals would say they are going through the motions when it comes to talent or to DE&I. That's not how it should be. And I guess the other two really quick ones I would say are data, right? Everybody's talking about data. And by the way, when I'm talking about data, I'm not talking about metrics. I'm not talking about time to fill and time in process and, time to close. I'm not talking about those things. Those are the same metrics that have been tracked for 20 years. I'm talking about data that fundamentally changes the game as far as the conversations between recruiters and hiring managers, and that fundamentally changes that between hiring managers and leaders of their organization and recruiters and their talent acquisition leaders. Like, if I'll just say this about data, if you don't have data, you have anecdotal conversations. If you have anecdotal conversations, you have assumptions and opinions. That's just a fact. That's what's going to happen. You have data-driven conversations. Those are more productive. They hold all parties accountable because there's no judgments here. It's just what the data tells us. And if you are wrong, you're wrong. The data is going to tell us that. So it holds everybody accountable, and it allows for faster and better decisions overall. And then the last one's applicant experience. Like, I don't think I need to tell anybody on here that the applicant experience is lacking in a major, major way, right? The other day I saw 75% of Americans say that they are dissatisfied with the hiring process. Yeah, everybody's dissatisfied because the applicant experience across the board is not good. It's not unique. It's not different. It's not better than anybody else's applicant experience. Like, some of them definitely are quite terrible, like the older ATSs from 20 years ago, but they're not mobile first. I mean, they're rife with issues in the applicant experience. So I don't know. Those I'm sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there, but there's a lot of problems there.
Yeah. I know when it comes to the diversity piece that you were mentioning of Lighthouse Research and Advisory, we had a research study came out last year that 2 out of 3 diverse candidates prefer a hiring test or assessment that doesn't just look at their current skills, but at their potential for future growth in assessments. And then nearly 2 and 3 workers say that hiring tests and assessments and video interviews are better than resumes at allowing them to show what they are really capable of, right? With diverse candidates, that was number one, is even higher. That number was even higher just in the diverse candidates. And we talked about this a little bit off the record with names, right? Names ending with certain letters and how those were red flags. And so, you'll think logically it makes sense. We all want to be judged on our merits, not our name and our skin, are the factors that don't affect our true ability to bring value to the organization and the company that we're looking to perform the job. But we find that if candidates isn't selected for a position, that they're happier because they were evaluated based on what they can really do versus a resume that shows colleges, right? Colleges was part of the whole diversity. You went to a certain college, and those red flags and things of that nature. When it comes to these, and I want to wrap up with just one or two more questions. What are some of the solutions to these problems? And really, I want to tie in what you do at Smartrank and how that may bring value to those who are listening to some of these problems. We shared a lot of problems, a lot of this, but let's get to the solution of that. These problems that we discussed that we see within the TA field.
Okay, well, let's just go through that list that I just went through. So let's look at productivity. Let's look at that one. So as I said, instead of going through, every single resume one at a time, which is not efficient or effective, frankly, what SmartRank actually does to solve that problem is, number one, it's completely automated. It's 100% automated. Now imagine if you're a recruiter and you've got 40 to 50% of your day back. What could you do with 40 to 50% of your day back? Because you're not reviewing resumes. Now that sounds crazy, right? Like, well, what do you mean? How do we do that? Well, it's the same set of requisition specific questions per what the hiring manager is looking for, exactly what they're looking for. We don't have to guess anymore. There's no guessing game here. Hiring manager, what exactly are you looking for? Well, I want somebody that's proficient in Python. Okay, that's not good enough anymore. And this goes along with the elevating talent acquisition. It's not good enough anymore for you to just say that. I need you to define for me, what does that mean? When you say proficiency, give me 3 or 4 levels of what you would say is like low proficiency, and give me examples of what that means. Intermediate, what does that mean? Expert, what does that mean? And guru, what would that mean? Like the ideal candidate would be able to do all of these things. I need you to further define that for me. So that's exactly what SmartRank does. And then 100% of the applicants are answering those questions. So then we can automatically stack rank and filter them based upon nothing other than how qualified are they for the role, which is the most important thing that they should be, judged upon is, are you qualified to do this particular job? So that's a big piece. Hiring manager engagement. We built a lot of tools. I mean, this was built by a hiring manager. So I know the things that are frustrating. So we took out all kinds of things as far as when you send feedback requests, little things that we put in there to make that process easier, like not needing to have their login and password. I mean, it's a small thing, but it's not. If you want to increase your hiring managers getting back to you, then you got to remove some of those things. And most importantly, though, for the hiring managers is you just give them exactly what they want, period. There's no more of this back and forth, arguing between recruiters and hiring managers. Well, you didn't understand what I needed. Well, you didn't tell me what I needed. We're going to capture it in questions and answers, and then we're going to ask everybody, and then we're going to look at the data. So DE&I, same thing. Because we don't care, as a part of our applicant experience, you can certainly submit your resume and we capture your education experience, all the same things that a normal ATS would do, but we don't need your resume. So that's the important part. That's not how you're going to ultimately be decided upon whether or not you get an interview or not. So because we don't need that, we can mask all that information. So we can mask your name, the college you went to, or rather the college you didn't go to, what year you graduated, your LinkedIn profile, your resume, all that can be masked. It's a setting if clients want to turn that on. So that's number one. And number two, every single applicant gets the exact same set of questions for that particular requisition. So that is the most equitable way that you can screen an applicant, is to give everybody 100% the same opportunity. If you can tell me one other way that's more equitable than giving literally every single person that applies, I would love to hear it, because that's what we do, is we give every single person that opportunity. And then from a data analytics, man, I can't even describe in this like what we're doing there, but it is fundamentally changing the game. I'll just give you an example. Like if you had, we can dig into the answers to every question that's asked, and we can even tell you how many applicants actually answered that particular answer. So let me give you an example. Like, let's say that the recruiter and the hiring manager have this conversation about salary, and the recruiter's like, it's going to be 60 to 70 grand. Or I'm sorry, the hiring manager says it's going to be 60 to 70 grand. And the recruiter's like, man, I think that's not enough money. I think we need to bump it up. And the hiring manager's like, no. I've hired people for that. That's what we're doing. Well, instead of an anecdotal conversation coming back, they walk back in with data, the recruiter does, and they say, okay, only 6% of our applicants are willing to accept that salary. So now that very much determines where do we go from here. You want to stick on that salary? It's going to take a while to hire this. And by the way, do you want to know, of those 6%, how many are actually qualified to your expectations? None. None of them were even a 50% or greater match for what you're looking for. So, oh, sorry. Were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, no, sorry. So that piece alone, it fundamentally changes the conversation. You're no longer having an anecdotal conversation. You're having a data-driven conversation. And now all the assumptions and opinions are out. We're just talking about the data and what decisions do we need to take, going forward. The applicant experience is the last one, right? So there's a lot of problems that we don't have enough time to talk about with the applicant experience. But, one of the things that we're doing is when applicants apply, they only need one login to SmartRank. Whether they apply to 20 different companies, one login. That doesn't exist out there today. When they are answering these questions, to your point about assessments, it's a myth. It's a misconception that they don't want to be able to answer some qualification questions. They just need to be related to the role. They don't want some obscure question about like some behavioral or psychological question like, would you rather be an apple, an orange, or a banana? Like, they don't care about that, right? They want to know, can you do the job? And they're willing to answer those questions. That's totally fair game. As long as it's fast and easy, they're totally down for that. So that's another big thing that, that I'd say that we do from the applicant experience. And then there's just a lot of little things that we put in there as well. But that kind of is, I guess, a few of the highlights about what SmartRank does.
Awesome. I appreciate you bringing a lot of value and attention to both problems and solutions, Keith, and what SmartRank, the value that you do there. How can someone connect and learn more about you and or SmartRank? Is there a platform that they can reach out to you at?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. The first way is obviously our website at www.smartrank.ai. I would also suggest going and looking at our LinkedIn. We do a lot of posts out there, and also our YouTube channel. So we're big believers in putting out videos that really kind of talk about these subjects we just got done talking about. So we have a good amount, and we're going to add a lot more videos out there. So I think that's another good channel that people could come and get a hold of us. Or you can also just email us at info@smartrank.ai.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining us here today at HR Tech Talks and bringing in some value, especially on the talent acquisition side of things, and sharing a lot of the solutions that your platform with SmartRank provides for potential clients in the future for you. Is there anything that you have left to say, or one last thing to give to our audience before we hop off of this?
The last thing I would say is just like, I'm on board with, let's elevate talent acquisition. Like, let's get talent acquisition where they ultimately deserve to be. And there's a number of steps we need to do, but it's a very important function of the company. It's probably, as I said earlier, probably the most important function because you're talking about bringing in your most important assets, and they're responsible for that. So let's get them the recognition that they deserve. Let's get them, to be the department that is really driving the organization.
The voice and the advocate for talent acquisition.
That's right.
Keith, ladies and gentlemen. Keith, I appreciate you. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks, George. Appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody for chiming in the comments and watching here live with us today. Thank you again to Keith and to Smartrank. Again, you can find more information on their website, www.smartrank.ai, for more information there. You can also join us, and don't forget to look and sign up at hrtechtalks.org for all your future tech talks with myself and or Ben Eubanks, who also will have some coming in the future as well. So make sure you subscribe there and follow us there for future notifications. And then also, just a reminder, coming up in the spring, we will be having our HR Tech Awards, and you can do nominations today. We're live and in action, and you can go ahead and nominate your Tech Award person or company today, and we'll be announcing those here in the springtime. So once again, I want to thank Keith. I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us here today at HR Tech Talks. Until next time, stay blessed.